Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another edition of What's Happening. My name is George Binns, and I'm here with my co-host, Gail Burke. And in contrast to the Morning Joe with Micah, we have the Evening Gail with George. And what we want to do tonight is a little different in that we want to explore some of the things that are behind the news that you don't hear of with the mainstream media. For instance, there was an article in, I think today's Salem News, today's the 8th of June, by the way, that announced that by 2030, the major metropolitan Boston area, which includes Essex County, will need 1.25 million megawatts of additional electric power. Sounds like a good number. Until you figure out that a typical wind turbine is only good for 1.5 megawatts. So that means we're looking at about 80,000 wind turbines to provide this. Or if you consider the Salem power plant that's being built right now, footprint, we need about 1,500 of them. So you start to wonder where this story came from a while back that, oh yeah, we got all the natural gas we need. We don't need this pipeline going through Peabody and Danvers. So you start to think about what's really going on and who's adjusting the news to meet their particular story.
I don't know, George. It sounds like an awful lot of windmills to be put around. Would you say 80,000?
80,000, yeah.
Okay.
Okay. We'll put them off the coast. Just
put them in John Kerry's backyard.
Yeah.
Okay, I want to move on to the national news. Last night, Democrat Hillary Clinton became the first woman nominee for President of the United States. She's also the first presidential nominee being investigated by the FBI, who is facing indictment on criminal charges for her activities when she was Secretary of State. Now, she has come out, and some of her supporters have come out and said, you should vote for her because she's a woman. Is that a good reason for voting for her? She
Not
thinks
really.
It is.
No, I mean, do you vote for Trump because he's a man?
Yeah.
I mean, these arguments fall apart because there's nothing behind them.
Right. Well, and also you have to ask, is she a good role model for women? I don't think so. She believes you're a sexist if you don't vote for her. Her whole campaign will focus on being a woman.
Well, that's the other thing that's starting to bother me about these campaigns, is that we could have an intelligent discussion, I think, over whether she has this capability or the experience to be president, or Donald Trump has that kind of thing. But by the time you see it in the news, it's, well, she's sexist, he's a homophobic, he's an Islamophobic, or somebody else is a racist. Everything gets reduced to one-word name-calling, right, with no explanations.
Right. Well, I find it rather amusing that some people who actually support her and who are well-known names like Dianne Feinstein of California, when asked what kinds of accomplishments she had when she was in the Senate, and Feinstein served with her in the Senate, she didn't know. She had to send somebody off to Google it so she could figure out what accomplishments there were. And guess what? There weren't very many.
Well, given our existing administration, time in the Senate is not exactly what I would consider tremendous resume material.
Well, you'd think that somebody who, for many, many years, has had her eye on the goal of being president would have something to do when she was in the Senate.
That gets to be an interesting predicament, that do you try to do something and risk failing because everybody's going to remember that you failed?
Yeah.
Or do you try to lay back and stay below the radar and not get nailed with anything? So they got nothing to really stick you with.
Well, if you want to talk about failures, when Bill was president of the United States, he gave her the go-ahead to figure out a health care plan. Well, the plan was so bad that not even the Democrats would vote for it.
Well, she got into a predicament on that one because she was trying to satisfy too many people and satisfied nobody at all. And then as a result, it was a hodgepodge that nobody could support. And the present administration got in there saying, well, we're going to reach across the aisle and we're going to be transparent. And that didn't happen. So you can just see, here we go again, if she gets elected, that things are going to happen behind closed doors, in quiet rooms, and we may see another presidential edict come down to do something that has nobody behind it, no support for it, and it'll get lost like the Obamacare in the regulations of when is this thing ever actually going to be detailed with all the regulations? And it goes on forever.
Well, I think it's interesting that Bernie Sanders made a comment that he didn't think she had good enough judgment to become president. And again, I have to go back to when Bill Clinton was in the White House. He also gave her authority to select a female attorney general. And after 2 failures,
they didn't go very far.
They didn't go. But then she also recommended Janet Reno. Now, people might remember Janet Reno in the whole David Koresh thing, where all
Waco,
in Waco, where let's see, how many women and children were killed?
Yeah.
Too many. Dozens and dozens of women and children were killed.
And then they had the other incident where they sent a sniper in and took out a woman and her baby behind the door. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. The little boy from Cuba.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's too many. Well, that's another episode, too, where they scoop the kid up and send him back.
Yeah. So talk about poor judgment.
There's not a heck of a lot that she's really got to brag about. Let's put it as politely as that.
Well, again, when asked what are her accomplishments, people can't.
Well, the reset with Russia worked out so well that we're almost fighting Putin in Syria right now.
I know. And now there's this big hoopla about Donald Trump. And is he a racist? Well, on the surface, and the way the lamestream media, as you put it, are talking about it, because he called the judge who's in charge of litigating a case against, was it Trump University?
Trump University, yeah.
He happened to say that he was a Mexican. And wow, people went into a rage. He's not a Mexican. He's an American. Well, in a politically correct world, you wouldn't say he was an American. You'd say he's a Mexican-American. And he just said he's a Mexican. Well, he is a Mexican-American. Or he's a Mexican of Mexican descent.
Yeah.
And that's not the worst part. And Trump was not articulate when he spoke about this particular judge. But in researching him and his ties to La Raza, which is a radical left-wing group in California that wants to take over the state of California and make it part of Mexico. And they are the people, there are some of the people that are at these rallies for Trump, waving the American flag and burning waving the Mexican flag,
yeah.
I'm sorry, and burning the American flag.
Yeah. So there's real problems in this country, and there's a long history that too many people want to resurrect and right ancient wrongs. And I think the Wayback Machine got lost with Mr. Peabody a long time ago, and there's no chance to coming back. What I think too many people fail to recognize is we the people, in conjunction with the if it bleeds, it leads media, have created an election game. And it turns out that Donald Trump was the most proficient at playing that game. much better than the 17 competitors he started, or the 16 competitors he started out with.
That's right.
And he's got to the point where he now has the nomination locked up. And we're going to be in a situation, I think, that when we go into the voting booth, we're going to have to hold our nose and pull the lever and wonder, how did we end up with these two possible candidates, which in the grand scheme of things, neither one of them has come across as saying that, hey, I've got this great plan, this is how I'm going to do it, and this is why the world is going to be better when I get there.
Well, I have to disagree with you a little bit on that, George.
Okay.
Donald Trump has said from the very beginning he's going to build a wall. And he's going to make Mexico pay for it. Now, people laughed at it, but look what's happened. Look what has happened with the immigrants. The borders are wide open. The president doesn't do anything about it. As a matter of fact, he's forbidding ICE to do anything about it. So they're coming across the borders from everywhere. We don't know who they are.
There's no doubt there's a problem with crossing the borders. Really a serious drug problem involved with it. On the other hand, this is where I get a little bit perturbed with the mainstream media, because you don't hear the whole story. One of the websites I get anxious every week includes an article by a Dr. George Friedman. He's a geopolitician, a geopolitics type of guy. And he made an interesting point comparing some of the comments that Trump has made about both Mexico and China. And you start to think about it. Mexico is the 15th largest economy in the world. They're not a bunch of slouches down there. Most of their success is beating China. It's cheaper, more effective to make products in Mexico than it is in China. And they're one of our major trading partners, if I get the list right. Number one trading partner for the United States in terms of goods going back and forth across the border is Canada. China is second. Mexico is third, and Japan is fourth. And George Friedman made the comment that a lot of the analysis that Trump is basing everything on is about 5 years old. The situation with Mexico is dramatically different. The situation with China is dramatically different now than Trump is portraying it. And that gets to another interesting thing, that he's telling a story that is resonating with his base. That implies his base is also 5 years out of touch with reality. And this is where I keep coming back to the idea that you don't get the latest and greatest information from it bleeds, it leads kind of reporting.
That's true. Well, we've talked about this before. When you just listen to a certain segment of the media and you don't go any further, of course, the information you get is rather biased. And if you really want to find out what's going on, you really have to use different sources, but you have to make sure they're credible sources. And, you know, in our Monday morning group, you and I both know that the people, it's a current events group down at the senior center, they don't do much research. So they only depend on, for instance, MSNBC or the rest of the mainstream media, and they don't go any further. So whether it's global warming, whether it's the election, or what it is, you really have to understand that this is the most important election in our lifetime, sure. And if you really, I've heard people say, well, we're not even going to vote. And I say, well, why don't you use a little bit of effort and figure out what it is that you're looking for in a candidate. You're never going to find the perfect candidate. But if you believe in, for instance, border control, if you believe in that America can be great again, which is what Donald Trump is saying, and I go for that. I think that I know I'm very tired of hearing the rest of the world talk about America as though we're some third world country, and they don't respect us the way they used to. And I think that somebody like Donald Trump can do a lot to helping restore that.
Well, one of the things you're getting into right away is that there's a thing called confirmational bias, in that a lot of people have got their minds made up, and they read the information or they watch the information to the point of, I got a story that supports my idea.
Yeah.
Stop thinking right now. And for the most part, I depend more on the web to find stuff. And a good example of it showed up Sunday. There's a website I watched called Daily Fenning. And they made a comment that, okay, there's a big concern right now about income equality or inequality. And they made a point in there of, okay, in 1990, the middle class, which by definition is people who are, or families who are accumulating either between $42,000 and $125,000, that defines middle class. In 1990, that accounted for like 62% of the population. And it made a point of, that is a very significant number. That's a majority. So if you're appealing to that middle class, good chances are you're going to get elected. Since then, it has dropped to 43% of the population is now in the middle class. Interesting number. And went on to say that, yeah, by the way, back in 1990, 29% was in the upper class. Everybody, the families accumulating more than $125,000 a year in aggregate income. And it's now 49% are in this upper class. And, oh, by the way, the lower class has remained about the same. It used to be 9%, now it's 8%. Well, you first look at those numbers and say, wait a minute, that's a problem? All these people who were in the middle class, a whole bunch of them moved into the upper class. Isn't that the American dream? And I wrote back to the guy that wrote this article and said, exactly that. What am I missing? And he said, yeah, that's a pretty accurate assessment of it. The only thing you have to think about is, how did that group of people move into the upper class? And you now start to get into the issue of the Fed and the zero interest that they've been charging on funds, and the financial engineering that too many companies are delving into, where they borrow money for practically nothing, go back and go out and buy their stock, drives up the stock price, and everybody thinks they're rich. And one of these days, somebody's got to pay the piper, and that you're going to have to pay back this loan you've got. And the real issue comes down to is, why didn't they invest in something that is going to produce some money to pay off the loan? And there is a day of reckoning coming, and I don't see this being discussed in the mainstream at all. No. You've got to go into the web, find these sites that get into this kind of discussion, and find, oh, that's really what's going on.
Well, I get annoyed because my husband was a small businessman. And he started out with literally with nothing, and he and his two partners. And they built the business, put in long hours, year after year after year, making very little money. And they built a successful business. It's not a large business, but you take people that, for instance, the fellow who came up with Walmart. Now, you go. He started out with nothing.
Oh, Walton, yeah.
Yeah, Wendy's.
Yeah.
And now these are big, huge businesses. Yeah. And, you know, people are always dumping on them. Oh, they're terrible because they're so wealthy, and you know, we can't have that. they don't take into consideration what went into building those businesses or how many people they employ.
Well, I
And
think where the difference comes in is that I don't think anybody begrudges a Steve Jobs or a Bill Gates or Zuckerberg the wealth that they've accumulated because, like you said, they built a big company and they started from practically nothing and made it go. I think the problem is these people who get these horrendous raises and platinum parachutes, and all they are is the next CEO of a company that already exists.
but people don't separate those
Exactly.
the two. They blend them all together so that anyone who's very successful has got to be mean and,
Well,
greedy.
I think it's anybody that's rich didn't really deserve it.
Yeah.
There's a
And they're
differentiation in there.
Yeah.
And the differentiation that really bothers me is when the market collapsed in 2008 and the banks got bailed out and all these people had to get retention bonuses with taxpayer money.
Yeah.
That still bothers me to this day. Obviously, it's 8 years later.
But you take somebody, for instance, like Donald Trump.
Yeah.
Now, he didn't start out poor, but he took the money that his father gave him and built it.
He parlayed it into a bigger business. That's
huge.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah.
And then you take somebody like
And the fact that
Hillary.
every one of his business didn't turn out great is exactly the point you're making, that, hey, this isn't a walk in the park.
No, and businesses fail. But you look at Bill and Hillary Clinton, and what have they? How have they gotten so
tremendous.
rich?
The thing you don't understand about Hillary is she's a tremendous public speaker.
Oh yeah, I forgot that. Yeah.
She gets $250,000 for her
For a
speech,
speech.
and she's earned $21 million at $250,000 a pop.
But we don't know what she was talking about.
No, well, she wouldn't tell us because then you wouldn't want to listen to her. But it's always interesting that year after year after year, Goldman Sachs and a few other the big banks have always brought her back to say the same thing. It must be very complicated that they couldn't
We
pick it up
probably
on the
couldn't
first one.
understand it anyway. Yeah.
In this issue that we're talking about, what's really behind a lot of the things, it's a local issue also. And one of the things I noticed recently is the mayor of Beverly announced that we've got a budget, and the budget is going to go up by 3.9%. Okay, whatever happened to Prop 2.5?
That was my question.
Okay. I don't know that answer either. But the one that really got to me is I got curious, and I found a website that's sponsored by the state that says that the median income in Beverly is now around $73,312. Okay. And it is increased to that level by 36% from the year 2000. Oh, that's nice. And if you do a little compound interest exercise, that means that the median income in Beverly for the last 15 years has been increasing at 2.39% per year. But the budget's going up 3.9.
So we're going to lose.
So the question is, what makes the administration, and I think we would probably have a similar discussion with Scanlon's administration, what makes them think that the city of Beverly and the people in it can continually pay more in taxes or increase in taxes than their income is increasing? There gets to be a point where, really, does that make the city really that attractive?
You got me on that one. I'd like to go back to accomplishments for our presidential candidates. Well, we listed the lack of accomplishments of Hillary Clinton, and I just would like to go through a few things that Donald Trump has done. The buildings he has built, the Grand Hyatt Hotel, the Trump Tower, the Woolman Rink, 40 Wall Street, Trump Place, and so on and so forth, the Trump International Tower in Chicago. But also, some of the things that he has talked about that he is in favor of, like I already said, talked about border control, but fair trade, lower taxes, and he's very much into the veterans. and I have not heard anything about that from Hillary. He's economic growth and reducing regulations. Now, we know that this administration, as well as the Clinton administration, were very much into regulations. I think I heard a number the other day of Obama. It was like 286 regulations, something like that, much more so than Bush or other presidents before him.
Oh, this is a continuing problem with the government. Can't imagine why we have a tax code that's 17,000 pages of regulations. Same thing has happened with the Obamacare. And the same thing has happened with the Dodd-Frank bill. All these bills get passed by Congress, and then they get handed off to the bureaucrats to write the regulations, and nobody has the foggiest idea what's happening until it hits the street and somebody says, "You did what? And I got to do what?"
Yeah.
And I don't think there's a lot of thinking going on in Congress when they pass these laws.
No, there isn't.
And of course, we get the classic Nancy Pelosi. You got to pass this bill to find out what's in it.
Yeah, it's exactly what happened. And now here we are in 2016, and we are finding out what went into Obamacare, and it's not very pretty.
Well, the United Healthcare has dropped 2 or 3 states already because they can't afford or they don't want the cost involved in some of these things.
It's interesting because I was up in Canada last week, and I picked up a Canadian newspaper, and it was talking. We've heard about how wonderful the Canadian healthcare system is and all of that. Well, it seems as though it's not all that great. And the wait times for people going into emergency rooms is the highest in the area, even as compared with the United States.
Yeah.
And the number of doctors that are going into private practice now, into private clinics, or are leaving. And if you have major health care and need an operation, you're going to wait a good long time before you get it. So people that can afford it are coming to the United States.
Well, having just gone through one of these exercises around here, it's not that good either.
Well, it's better than if you live somewhere else, George.
Yeah.
Well, I can see that our time is almost up. This has been fun. I think we should do this again. And
another evening with Gail and George.
We can do that.
Yeah.
There's certainly a lot of subjects to discuss.
Well, yeah, and I think we've highlighted most of the stuff on a national basis, but locally we got the same kind of problem. We get the paper. The one recently got my attention is they want to put a 65 mile per hour limit on big trucks, put a governor in it.
Yeah, I saw
and
that.
because they've got a number of accidents that have been involved with big trucks. Well, that's nice. But nobody asked the question, how many of those accidents were caused because the truck was doing more than 65 miles an hour? And that's the real issue. So this is the way these regulations creep into the system. Somebody sees a problem, thinks they've got a solution, forces the solution through without checking to see, is that solution really going to fix anything?
Right.
And that's, I think, that somebody continually has to watch out for, and that's the basis for our government, unfortunately.
And that we'll have to discuss in another show. I want to thank you all for watching and look forward to being with you again. Good night.